realize that they are making every day. One path feels easier, safer, and costs nothing upfront, but slowly it takes everything from you. And the other demands responsibility, discomfort, and the ownership, but it returns clarity, purpose, and long term impact. So, tonight we are talking about that choice. So, hey, dear listeners, welcome back to another powerful episode of Mind Meets Machine, where we explore the leadership, consciousness, and the human decision making in a world shaped by pressure, systems, and technology. So, this is a space for the honest conversations about responsibility, identity, and the growth. And our guest today, please welcome Caleb Matthews. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Avik, for having me. It's always a delight to have conversation with you. Really looking forward to this one today.
Amazing, Caleb. Thanks so much for joining today. Dear listeners, before we delve deep into our discussion today, I'll quickly love to introduce you with Caleb. So Caleb is the founder of the C-Link and an international motivational speaker with over 20 plus years of experience helping the leaders, creatives, and faith-driven individuals discover their purpose. So through his DNA of design framework, he helps people to see how spirit, soul, and body align for the clarity and impact. And in this episode, we are exploring the victimhood versus leadership. Why one feels cheap but costs everything, and on the other hand, why the other feels expensive but creates long-term return. So, why do wait? Let's get started. Welcome to the show again.
Thank you so much. These are always circled on my calendar whenever I get to speak with Avik and his team. Little bragging on him and his team, just because they're so filled with deeper questions than just the ordinary questions. So I'm really, really excited about what's to come.
Amazing. Great to have you always, Caleb. So, Caleb, like before we label anything like as victimhood or leadership, I want to start at like, in your experience, what moment usually wakes someone up to the fact that they have been living from reaction instead of responsibility?
Moment of intersection comes when cultural constructs meets our individual destiny. And what I mean by that is we're surrounded every day by cultural peer pressure and conformity. In the word conform is the word con and form. So there's that pressure of giving into a con job. We've heard that phrase before, of forming into an image that culture says, oh, if you don't do this, you're not going to be a successful business person. If you don't do this, you're not going to have a proper education. You know what I mean? So this is where the problem begins, is when we give into a conform construct instead of our own individual DNA of design.
Okay. So, like that moment of awareness often arrives quietly, but it changes everything, like how everything else is seen, right? So, when we're talking about this, I also believe that there definitely would be a kind of misconception, which is a common misconception, I would say. Like, victimhood often looks harmless and even justified. But I'm really curious, like, why does it feel like it cost nothing in the beginning? And
yeah, it's easy to get on the bandwagon, so to speak, when everybody else is saying, okay, let's all protest about this, or all like resist this, or follow the crowd just because it seems like the right thing to do. There's no cost involved to follow what a big chunk of other people are doing. But when it becomes costly is when you and I and our audience, we decide to go on a path that goes against the grain. That's when the cost starts to come. But in the beginning, it can look relatively harmless, especially when we're doing something that maybe everybody else has done, like the way that Tony Robbins is doing it, or Grant Cardone is doing it, or all these influential people, but they have their own walk to walk, and we have our own. But it can look harmless because learning from people is not a bad thing. No different than me learning from you, Avik, or you learning from me, or from our audience. But if we let that become our identity, then that's when it becomes dangerous, in my opinion.
I definitely buy out your point, definitely. And that false sense of safety is what makes it so difficult to recognize early, right? And also, like the root cause, right, which is very, very important, and the deeper patterns also. Like, so if you go deep, like, where do you see that victimhood really coming from? Is it the trauma? Is it the culture, conditioning, or something more spiritual in nature?
I'm going to say all of the above. And this is where multiple perspective advantage comes into play, MPA, and looking at a bigger, broader view. I think a
Okay.
lot of our audience will appreciate a good cricket game or a good football game or a good sporting event. I'm just going to just go on a risk there and say that. And at a good sporting event, there's many different perspectives. There's a perspective of the field, of the players. There's a perspective of the fans and the audience. There's a perspective of the TV cameras. There's a perspective of the owners who own the team. There's a perspective of the airplane that goes over the stadium. There's a perspective of the world where you see the world and the galaxies and the planets. So we can see
Hmm.
here that there's many different perspectives. And if we just get caught up in one perspective and not seeing the bigger picture, then we can get lost. We really can lose our way. But when we see through these different lenses of, okay, this victimhood could be coming from a spiritual misconception, a misalignment. It could be coming from a childhood trauma. It could be coming from a cultural conformity and all the above, or maybe one of those things. And this is what's important to delve into, taking a step back, and we've talked about this before, Abik, I think on one of your previous podcasts, is taking a census of our senses. And that's why it's so important to be really leaning into our own individual DNA of design and not somebody else's design, because they have armor that's customized for them. You do for you, me for me. But when we follow our own design, then that's where the game changes.
That's definitely true. I mean, it's really powerful, like how unexplained beliefs can quietly shape the entire identity, right? So, I mean, what stands out is often, I would say, the responsibility gets reframed as the operation rather than opportunity. So, if you can share, like, how does the victimhood show up practically, like in a leadership, in relationship, personal discipline? What are the signals, like someone has crossed that line?
Signals begin with self-talk. This is where I like to begin, is the way that I speak to myself. I'm going to use my own example here. The way I
Okay.
talk to myself in the mirror, the way I speak to my subconscious, what I speak about is going to determine where my heart is. And Jesus talked about this principle in the scriptures: where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What does that mean? It means when the majority of my conversation, if the majority of my conversation is, oh,
Mm,
man, that Avik, he's getting all the breaks, but me over here, I'm not getting anything done. If I start
yeah.
saying that enough over my life that I'm cursing myself, and I'm actually not stepping into my inheritance, because the words that are coming out of my mouth are creating a negative pathway neurologically within those pathways, and it's going to manifest in my life. And how I speak to myself, what I declare will be established, whether positively or negatively. So, really, the first step for me personally, and I would encourage your audience, is self talk, is speak to your subconscious, train your subconscious, because
Mm,
95% of what we say, our subconscious actually takes in. So it's going to drive our neurons and our neurological pathways one way or another. And that's where it begins. So this is where victimhood starts to surface, is if I start declaring it long enough that I'm not going to get a break, oh, Avik's going to get the breaks, or that person over there is going to get breaks, but I'm not going to get the breaks, even though I'm working for it. I'm never
mm,
actually going to have success. I'm sabotaging my success by what comes out of.
agree, agree. So you say that leadership costs everything, and so on that only, like if we talk, like what does it, like, I mean, the leadership actually demand from a person internally?
Great calling demands a great separation internally and externally. And we cannot do things the same way that 99% of people do them, because if we do, we're not going to follow our purpose. And that might sound cruel or harsh, or, oh man, Caleb, that sounds like such a high bar, but it really is true. We look across history. History speaks, right? Like Mother
Right.
Teresa and Winston Churchill and George Washington and Muhammad Ali. I'm just talking about different sports athletes and also individual history makers and leaders, and past, present, and future. Anybody that changes history always had a great separation. And that's just the reality of it. So internally, we have to be willing to go into that great separation. Maybe it means that we can't do something that 99% of other people is okay for them to do. But for me and you, it's not okay. So we
Yeah,
have to take that inventory of what is required for us to step away and have a great separation for that great column.
exactly. That cost often includes ego, comfort, and the familiar excuses. Am I right? I mean, if you can
Yeah.
clarify.
The cult of comfort is
Yeah,
really where it hones into, right? Just to use a practical example, if I could, we all have the same 24/7, the same
correct.
365 days a year, the same time pie chart that we all can give accountability for to ourselves and to God and to our peers and to those who are training us in leadership.
All right.
But for ego and for comfort to get in the way, it could look like, okay, instead of me building up my own brand,
All
doing
right.
the hard work and putting in the work for the newsletter and putting in the work for what I want to build up to provide value for my clients, I could just be spending it on going on trips to, Paris and
All right.
Dubai and all these places that are nice. I'm not saying those things are evil or wrong to have a good time, but if I'm just going to play the whole time and I'm not actually
Yeah.
going to get into proper protocol and alignment, because this is one of the things that one of my late mentors talked about. He said there's tickle time and then there is protocol time. And if we get into too much tickle time, too much cult of comfort, and we're not in protocol time, we're never going to fulfill our purpose.
I really love that word, the two word you mentioned. It's I mean, cult, the cult of that part, right? I really love the way that you mentioned it. It's really, really true. And the cult of comfort. So, wow, that is something I really loved it. Yeah, exactly.
Sure, exactly.
And in terms of, if we say the long term ROI, on the other side of that cost, what would you say? Like the long term ROI for the leadership that brings victimhood that can, and that never can, like we can say.
Yeah, long-term ROI for leadership versus victimhood.
Exactly.
The return on investment for victimhood
Hmm.
is really digging your grave deeper. It's
Yeah.
getting deeper into that toxic culture, because when you've created a toxic culture, it's really hard to break that culture. It's hard to break out. It's hard to say, I'm going to shift from this toxic mindset. But when we have that ROI of
Hmm.
leadership,
Yeah.
here's what it looks like for that. And that is an example from one of the great Psalms in the Bible. David says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for thou art with me. Well, in order to get to the mountaintop, you have to walk through the valley.
All
And the
right.
height of our mountain is proportionate to the depth of our valley. So if we walk through our suffering, which we all have suffering, we all have hardship, we're
Right.
not shying away from that. This world is a tough place, but there's one of two options. We can choose to continue in victimhood, or we can choose to embrace our obstacles and turn those into our arsenal. So the depth of our valley is proportionate to the height of our mountain. So that ROI for a leader is, yes, I've had suffering. Yes, I've had hardship, but how can I use my story and my individual DNA design to liberate somebody else, even if it's just one person? Just take one person. If I can liberate one person with a story from my hardship and my testimony, that's worth it. That's the ROI of a leader versus a victim says, I'm going to wallow in my own self pity. A leader says, I'm going to use my suffering for somebody else's triumph.
And that written, I don't think it's just a kind of external success, but it's the authority and the peace from the inside, right? And so, for everyone who is listening right now, I definitely want to ask everyone, honestly, like, where in your life are you paying nothing today? But losing something valuable over time? Please do let us know. I'd love to know from your end. And also, Caleb, like, if you can also share, like, from your experience, and what would you say on this?
Where I'm paying nothing, you mean? Or something that doesn't cost something for me?
Yeah, yeah,
What doesn't, I love that. What doesn't cost
yeah,
something for me? What costs nothing but costs everything? It's like a paradox.
yeah.
What costs nothing but costs everything is to make that daily decision to move the needle 1 inch
Hmm.
further. 1 inch further. That costs nothing
Hmm.
because it's one decision I can make to do something or something else, but it costs everything. So it's both. It costs nothing, but it costs everything because here's a perfect example of this conversation we're having
Hmm.
right now.
Yeah.
You and I, Avi, could be doing anything else right now. We could be doing anything else for 45 minutes. We've chosen to have a conversation of where mind meets machine, where
Hmm.
our perspective meets the machine of the world that we live in. This is the decision that we've made. So this is costing me nothing because this is my passion, but it's costing
Yeah.
me everything because I'm not going to be able to have this moment ever again in my life. So it's both. So it's cost me nothing, but it's cost me everything. That's the beauty of time. Time
Yeah.
is that vial that costs you nothing because you're living the moment, but it costs
Hmm.
you everything. So I think it's both.
Amazing, amazing. And that hidden part, right? The victimhood. The victimhood, it can feel like it's protecting us from something. But in one thing, I'm curious, like, why do you think that people are actually trying to avoid when they stay in that victimhood?
They're trying to avoid embracing their our God given
Mm-hmm.
trichotomous being. We have a spirit that has a soul, that has a body.
Mm-hmm.
And victimhood will say, well, I can only control what I can control. And if it's out of my control,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm just going to wallow in pity. Oh, life's been unfair.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it because somebody cheated me, or oh, God hates me, right? Like, or even putting the onus on God.
Is it that kind of regret they have in their mind or something, or like what?
Yeah, it's an unwillingness to embrace the mystery. It's an unwillingness to embrace the mystery of the spirit, soul, and body, because most of our world, we've talked about this before, is in the dichotomous worldview. It's in the mind and the body, but separate from the spirit. And that's why I love speaking to people like yourself from India, because you are brilliant minds, but the spirit is a fascination and
Yeah.
it's together. Whereas in the West, we like to go in extremes. Oh, well, either completely into the intellectual or completely into the spiritual, but they're separate. But they were never meant to be separate because the
Mm.
Bible says that spirit and soul, God created man and woman in his own image. In his image, he created them. And the word of God divides both spirit and soul, the joints and the marrow. There's a combination of the spirit and the soul. That's why it says in the Psalms, David says, why, oh my soul, are you downcast? Well, who's talking? The spirit is talking, not
Yeah.
his soul. There has to be a combination. And I think that's where people get off track, to answer your question.
That's lovely. Yep. Yeah. And I totally believe like it's a combination. I mean, the spirit and soul. So definitely it's a combination. And yes, you rightly said that the men and women is just a picture. I mean, we just seeing them like that, but it's the soul.
Yeah, exactly.
And in your experience, what will be the most, or maybe what will be the most important moment that usually flips the switch? Like where someone realizes that I cannot keep living like this and I just need to start choosing the leadership, kind of.
Moment where it starts to shift, that 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 worldview shift takes place when the pain of being good is greater than what you could be in your individual God-given alignment. And what I mean by that is being good for long term is not enough. There are plenty of people who are good at what they do. Life can be enjoyed in a good way, but being what the God aspect, we're walking in your design versus being good at something. When you realize that being good is no longer enough and you want to have joy and fulfillment, I want to use an example from one of my great movies. It's a very famous movie called Chariots of Fire. I'm not sure if you've
Okay.
ever seen it before. It's about the story of Eric Liddell and Harold Abrams, two runners who ran for the UK in the Paris Olympic Games. And one was a Christian and one was a Jew. And the Christian, Eric Liddell, he had this phrase he said when he ran, he said, when I run, meaning running in the Olympic Games, when I train for running and when I run, I feel God's pleasure. I feel like I'm in my alignment. I'm not just good at something. I'm experiencing joy. This is the moment. This is the moment where we shift. Is when, okay, I can either continue to settle for the good or I can do what I'm built for. When we reach that decision, then that's when everything changes from just being a victim and doing things that are good versus actually doing something that is fulfilling. That's what it means to walk in our DNA of design, right there.
Exactly. Exactly. And you know that language tells always the truth. So when you are listening someone say or someone talk, that what phrases or the patterns tell you that they are in the victimhood mode, and even if they don't realize it.
Some of those patterns for me is when somebody is talking about everything that's around them or happening to them or their environment more than they're taking ownership of
Okay.
their decisions. Those little hints, even if someone's not aware of it. I like to say this: I can tell if somebody is walking in their DNA of design versus abdicating to mediation. And this is something that is really a big message for me as well, is when somebody's abdicating to mediation. How does that look? Well, if I have a if I have a 10-minute conversation with one of somebody that we both know in Veek, maybe you recommend somebody to sit down with me and have a discussion. And the majority of the discussion they're spent talking about, oh, my mentor says this, or, my teacher says this. And they're almost talking third person versus actually taking ownership of what's happening in their own individual life. It's okay. I understand that you respect your mentor and you have things that you've learned or things about that season, but I want to hear about what you believe, your lens, and I want to hear you take ownership of your walk right now versus living third person. That's one of the clues I look for, is if somebody's abdicating to guruism or mediation or really good teachers, but they're not actually owning where they're at. That's one of the clues I look for, is abdication and mediation.
Okay. And a lot of people think that the leadership means controlling the outcomes. So how do you define it? Like when life still feels like uncertain, messy, and unfair.
I would say there has to be an element of uncertainty, but there also
Okay.
has to be an element of partnering with that uncertainty. What does that look like? That looks like the example, a very, very simple example of a ship going out into the ocean with its sails up. We don't know where the wind's going to come from as a ship. Ship does not know that. But when your sails are up and when the wind does come, what's guaranteed is that it will propel you into a direction. If the sails aren't up, then the ship's not going to go anywhere. And the wind of uncertainty in life and the sails in the ship of our own individual posture. Our posture is what we can control. We can't control where the wind's going to come from, but we can control our posture. And our posture is putting ourselves in a position to succeed. It's being willing to be going out there, even if it means taking a risk that other people don't understand. But willingness, partnering with the unknown, that's where the gravy is. That's where the sweet sauce is. Because if we aren't willing and there's a wind of momentum coming, then somebody else is going to take advantage of that momentum. If I am so focused on posturing and I'm striving too much, then I could also miss that wind as well. So we have to meet in the middle. We can't be too extreme. There's a culture of extremes, we can get off course.
And like the leadership cost you everything upfront, then I'd say, like, what are the daily reps, maybe the small decisions that create long-term ROI that you're talking about?
Long-term ROI would be facing myself or you facing yourself, Adik, or audience. Just sit back and imagine as you're listening to this podcast right now. Close your eyes. Here's an activation. And close your eyes and ask yourself at the end of 2026 or at the end of 2036, 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, 30 years from now, close your eyes and face that version of you and ask yourself, did I do everything? Did I do everything within my spirit, soul, and body, my trichotomous construct? Did I do everything within my own DNA of design to be a good steward of the gifts that are in my life? And if you can answer yes to that question, then you have done good in your ROI. You've been a good steward of your talents. I've been a good steward of my talents. If you close your eyes and you look at that version of yourself and like, no, what I'm doing right now is not going to propel that version of myself to success in 1 year, 10 years, 20, 30 years, then it's time to reassess where you are at within your own DNA of design. And this is the good news is that if you're listening to this podcast right now, if you're hearing our voice, there's time. Time is the currency. Use your time wisely.
Exactly. Exactly true. So, listeners, before we move, I would love to summarize in short. Like, victimhood, it protects comfort in the short term, but leadership builds freedom, meaning, and the impact in the long term. So, Caleb, for the listeners who want to explore your work, your framework, or connect with the ceiling, where can they find you?
First of all, Avik, thank you for this conversation. It's been a wonderful gift. These are always treasure boxes I love to experience with you. And for everybody listening, if this idea, leadership versus victimhood and more, the bigger picture of DNA design and uncovering your unique spiritual blueprint resonated with you, I want to give you a practical next step. So I've created a free tool called the DNA of Design quiz. It's a free quiz, takes about 5 minutes, and it will reveal your primary design archetype. So whether you're a visionary, prophet, healer, builder, or strategist, you can finally understanding why you're wired the way you are and start living in alignment with that. So here's where you go. calebmatthews.net/quiz, calebmatthews.net/quiz. When you take it, you'll get my free private newsletter, Seek the Link, where I share deeper insights on dreams, history, and purpose, leadership that I don't share anywhere else. And Avik, thank you for having me on the show, Mind Meets Machine. I'd love to offer you as just a gift and a thanks to you, a free personal one-on-one design discovery session that you can take advantage of at any time. So let's get connected after this call and set up. But for everybody, calebmatthews.net/quiz. There's lots of value in there. Go discover your design. Includes my free newsletter. Seek the link. But this has been wonderful as always. Avik, such a rich conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It really, really means a lot, Caleb. And dear listeners, thank you so much for joining on Mind Meets Machine. And as I always mention, I'll put all the details and the links into the show notes for your easy reference. And today's conversation is a reminder that leadership is not a title or a position. It's a daily decision. So if this episode challenged you, don't rush past it. The cost of leadership is real. So is the return. Right? So, with this hope, until next time, stay aware and choose deliberately. Thank you so much.